Welcome to Rosie the Reviewer. We're your hosts. I'm Sam,
And I'm Marcia.
and we like World War II media, and we want to talk about it. Welcome back to Rosie the Reviewer. This week we're talking about the film The Dirty Dozen, which came out in 1967. It was directed by Robert Aldrich, with a screenplay by Nunna Lee Johnson and Lucas Heller. It's based on the novel The Dirty Dozen by E.M. Nathanson, which came out in 1965. It's the story of a fictional military unit comprised of the worst convicts the army could find, sent on a secret mission into occupied France and promised a pardon upon their return if they survive. It won an Academy Award for Best Sound Editing. And here with us today, we have our friend Tom, who was the one who recommended this movie to us. So welcome, Tom.
Hi, a long-time listener, first-time guest, I guess.
What did you think of this movie, Mark?
Oh boy. I have some mixed feelings about this movie. I had to pause it halfway because I got bored. I was like, I don't want to watch this movie anymore. But then the second half was better, so I should have just let it go on. So yeah, mixed feelings. I thought it was a little bit long in the storytelling was kind of slow in a way. Not a lot happens in the first half, in the sense that all they do is train for like an hour, and I was like, when are they gonna get to the good part? And I just didn't care about any of the characters so much. So it's not my favorite movie, and I feel like I want to say it's a product of its time, but even then, we've seen a lot of these, and it's just not my favorite. So didn't love it. I'm sorry, Tom. I wanted to really like it.
Did either of you see this movie before the pod?
Not me.
Not me, no, it was the first time. Heard other people saying it was good, and I expected it to be good because I don't know why. I just did because everyone is saying it's good. And it's not like a bad movie, I just didn't enjoy it that much.
Yeah, I feel like you had to be I think it's like a guy movie. I think it's one of the quintessential guy movies. So, I think that might be part of it.
Could be.
Yeah.
I kind of missed some motivations maybe for the characters and just a reason to care about them. I cared about some of them toward the end, but not all of them.
It certainly feels like the kind of movie that your dad would watch on a Sunday afternoon. Like it would just be on TV kind of thing. And I think a lot of people feel really nostalgic for it because they watched it a lot as kids, etc. And the book is, the first 450 pages is them training and becoming a unit. And then the last few pages are the actual mission itself. And it took me a while to figure out what the author was doing, to stop waiting for something to happen. And once I did that, I enjoyed the book a lot more. And I think the movie tried to borrow that same format, but like without any of the supporting character development. And that just made it fall kind of flat in places.
You know what I really enjoyed? I really liked the war game bit. That was probably my favorite bit. It's just them being little rascals and doing what they're supposed to be doing in a very smart way, and that kind of got me excited. So I guess that's just in the second half. And then you get, obviously, the big mission, which was also fun. But yeah. I don't know. I could have missed it, and I wouldn't have minded not having seen it. But I don't hate that I saw it.
It definitely is funny that what everything is leading up to is the big mission, and it is, I think, 30 minutes of the film, and the film is 2.5 hours long, or just about. And basically, they're doing stuff from beginning to end. There's no like 30-minute credit sequence or anything like that. It's just the end of the movie is the mission, and most of the movie is leading up to it. Although I think as a ratio, that's still better than the book, because what was it? Sam, you read the book, and I think the mission was actually even smaller in regards to how much of the page count was
Oh,
actually related to that.
yeah, I mean, effectively, they start the mission and then shit goes sideways. And then the remaining entire part of the mission is told by a mission report over a span of like 5 pages.
Okay, interesting. I guess that doesn't work in the movie, so they had to make the actual mission a mission. But I don't know. I've liked training stuff in other movies. I just thought this was kind of a long one. And I also thought it was a little bit repetitive. They get their introduction, they introduce all 12 of them, and then they kind of do it again, but by their crime. So I was like, couldn't they have done this in just a smarter, more conflicted way, maybe? But maybe that's just me, guys. I don't want to down on this movie. Like, it's not a bad movie.
What's your background with this movie, Tom?
Well, okay. So my background, I did not watch a lot of World War II movies as a kid, but this was my World War II movie. I grew up with two older brothers, and this movie played, I think it was on the History Channel or something. And this was back when we had VHS players and you could record off of the TV. So my World War II movie was The Dirty Dozen, which was a recorded copy off of the History Channel where the first 20 minutes didn't get recorded because they were still figuring out how to do it. So basically, in preparation for the podcast, I had actually watched the whole movie, and that was the first time I had seen the first 20 minutes of the film.
You're like, it makes so much more sense now.
I got so much more context out of it now. That was kinda my quintessential World War II movie, and so that's why, when you guys were looking for recommendations, that was the first one that jumped up. But I mean, I can talk about it a little bit later. There's a lot of this movie and a lot of other films. There's a lot of its DNA goes on to inspire a lot of other media, including World War II media and including stuff that's more of the action adventure genre. Its influence is pretty potent, even if the film itself doesn't necessarily grab everyone. There's something in this film that sort of moves on afterwards.
When did The Great Escape come out? Because it feels kind of similar.
1968 maybe, like, it's very similar time frame.
Yeah, so that was the first thing I thought about when watching this one. It's got the same kind of vibes, except I like that one slightly more, maybe?
1963.
Oh, so it's earlier. Interesting.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I think there is another movie, Kelly's Heroes, comes out, I think, 2 years later. Kelly's Heroes actually has Telly Savalas and Donald Sutherland in it.
That's been recommended to me by my friend named Tim. Well, I have time for this one, and then I'll have to invite Tim to come and talk about Kelly's Heroes with us.
Yeah, I did read the novel that this is based on. Nathanson did not serve in World War II, he was too young. I get the sense he was one of those people who like, he was a young teenager during the war, so one of those things where these are guys that you really look up to. I get that vibe from it for sure. The book is much more of a character study than a movie, so we learn, like, where these guys are from, what they did, like, from their perspective, why they did it, how they feel about the way the world has treated them, and they're all very different from one another. They each have their own sensibilities and worldviews, and they're not all good people, like, far and away, not all good people, but they are all real people, and I do feel like the book tried to be honest about the racism experienced and or carried out by some of the men, for example, and the movie effectively rinses out all of that griminess. And like we were talking about, like the mission in the book is almost an afterthought because the point of the book is not the mission. Like the mission is representative of the culmination of all this work that asks the question, can men change? If you send a group of men on a suicide mission together, does that make them rise to something larger than themselves? And in some cases, the answer is yes. And in some cases, the answer is no. And in the mission report that caps off the book at the end, the military brass have decided that they will never be repeating this experiment because, in their eyes, it's failed. But once you know kind of the way that these guys have developed internally, you're like, well, I don't think it was a total failure, because we get to see how these guys have grown and changed in some ways. And I think in the book, it's very noticeable how long it takes Reisman, the CO, to trust them and how long it takes for them to trust him and each other. It's a work in progress right up until the end. Like, even right before the mission, he's not 100% on all these guys. And it's a long time before they're allowed to leave the stockade without guards, before they're allowed to handle guns and live ammunition. And this is all part of this, this like psychological thing where we're learning about these guys. And this is not a heartwarming tale where all these men make good in the end. One character in the book is killed behind enemy lines because he attempts to rape a maid and she stabs him with a pair of scissors. Another character who has insisted he's innocent the whole book stabs a Nazi's girlfriend and has an immediate horrible flashback wherein he realizes that he's actually not innocent. And he panics and he runs out into the hall and he's like, I did it. And he's like firing his guns off. And that's what it tips off the Germans to the fact that they're there. So, yeah, I don't know. I found that the book really tried to get into the nitty-gritty of humanity in a way that the movie did not.
No, the movie's more interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of, "Wouldn't this be really cool if it happened?" I mean, it kind of is at the end, but, like, the way the movie handles the tension of the prisoners and the CEO is very interesting in that it's somewhat present and somewhat completely glossed over. There's no doubt by the end of the film, like Riesman in the film has no doubt about these men. They're all on the same page and they're all as a unit. But there is a little bit of that kind of tension of them not necessarily coming together as a unit as a whole, but it's really concentrated in basically Telly Savalas's character Maggot. Like he really stands out as the only one who's kind of not socialized by the end of the film. Everyone else is kind of a good soldier by the end of the film.
Yeah, and there was really this sense in the book that I got, like, I used to be a teacher, and there would if you go in to teach high school kids, there's a very real sense of, like, how real is my authority and how far does it extend? And if you make a misstep, you will, like, lose all of these people. And that's very much the situation that Reisman finds himself in. And in the book, sometimes he makes mistakes. And sometimes that puts him, he does the one step forward, two steps back thing with these guys because he has to make them trust him, as much as anything else.
Yeah, I didn't get that sense from the movie very much. But I did both like and dislike, I guess. The relationship between Reisman and the other, is he a general or a colonel? His arch enemy?
Yeah, Colonel Breed is actually in charge of the opposing kids summer camp. And so it's kind of like you have like the poor kids versus the rich kids. So
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
the way that they know each other in the book is a little bit different. So Colonel Breed, who is sort of Reisman's arch nemesis, they know each other because when Reisman was on a previous undercover mission, he's part of the OSS, and so he was in I want to say Italy on an undercover mission, and he's in this town and he needs like help from the army in some way. He needs like a jeep, he needs fuel, whatever. So he goes to Colonel Breed and he's like, "Hey, I'm an American, I'm undercover, like can I have this stuff?" And Breed arrests him and throws him in the stockade and is like, "I don't believe you. You're a spy." And like tries to like get him to tell the truth and whatever. And then ultimately the higher ups, even above Colonel Reed, come down and they're like, "Actually, that guy is a spy. Maybe let him go and don't be an asshole." And so Colonel Breed is furious that Reisman made him look bad, even though it's his own fault.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, interesting. Should we get into the movie and talk more as we go along?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's get into the movie. We open at Marston Town Military Prison in London in 1944. A young American soldier is hanged for an unknown crime. This is where we meet Major John Reisman, played by Lee Marvin, as he is one of the witnesses.
Yes, and the book opens the same way, witnessing this execution of a man that we don't really know anything about. But crucially in the book, this is where we get an intro to this guy named Sergeant Morgan, who is the hangman at Marston Tyne. And we sort of get this period where this young man's being executed from Reisman's perspective, but we also get it from Sergeant Morgan's perspective as the hangman. And then when Reisman goes on to run this unit of convicts, he brings Morgan with him almost as like a boogeyman because all of these men are frightened of the hangman once they learn who he is. And you don't really get that so much in the movie, but it's really kind of an interesting psychological gambit that Reisman tries, and I don't know if it really works out for him ultimately.
I thought this opening scene was interesting because you can kind of see Reisman's discomfort with this man being hanged, not knowing if it was justified, which is, of course, a question that they try to answer in the movie but don't really. And I wish they'd gone into that a little bit deeper because if they open like this, that's a good way to open that question and to even question his morality, like where is he on this whole debate? And then they don't take that home at all in the movie, which I thought was a shame.
I think it's a good scene because it shows Riesman, he definitely gets a sense of not feeling comfortable with this or there's something wrong, but he doesn't say anything. But we'll find out soon that Riesman's also a bit of a loose cannon. So it's also possible that he's kind of seeing a reflection of himself or his own performance in the eyes of his superiors.
Yeah, like a there but for the grace of God kind of thing.
Yeah. I don't know, it just had a whole bunch of things that could have gone so much deeper in the movie. I just feel I just missed it a bit. So I guess I have to read the book.
Reisman is called into a meeting with a number of military higher ups, including General Sam Warden, played by Ernest Borgnine, famous character actor Ernest Borgnine, and Major Max Armbruster, played by George Kennedy. He is assigned to take on a team of soldiers that are currently imprisoned for various serious crimes, train them up, and have them attack a chateau at Rennes, France, right before D Day. The goal is to kill as many German generals as possible because the chateau is kind of like a gathering place for these generals where they get together and play their war games. And in exchange, the men will earn a reprieve from their sentences.
So, one thing I think is neat is they call it Project Amnesty. And the idea is that originally they're going to pick 12 people or 12 criminals, and they're going to they don't start by getting their sentences commuted. It's Reisman has to kind of argue for their freedom because he says it's not going to work unless they have something to fight for. And if you just suspend their sentences for the time in which they're serving, no one's actually going to give it their all. So he has to sort of fight the brass for their ability to get freed at the end. There's another point here, too, where General Warden doesn't like the idea of sending them behind lines to go kill staff officers. He kind of refers to it as behind the lines nonsense. And Reisman equally doesn't like the idea of what they're doing. He says it's crazy. And in the end, they sort of agree with each other. Once Reisman leaves the room, General Warden's like, well, he is right about one thing. There's definitely some lunatics in charge, or there's some idea that they're not all on the same page as to why they're doing the mission in the first place. But I thought it's interesting too because they do say they're out there killing German officers, but they do specifically say staff officers, which there's two kinds of officers in the military: staff officers and line officers. And line officers are the kinds of officers that are actually commanding troops and carrying out missions, whereas staff officers are kind of people who work in the military complex, but they're not necessarily out there commanding soldiers directly. So this is an attack that's what you might call like a terror attack. Like they're going in there to disrupt morale, they're going in there to kill as many people as possible, but there's no real strategic objective, and they say as much. So it's an interesting idea where the idea is they're just going there to screw around and kill as many people as possible, and there's really no huge overall point as to the mission.
Yeah, and I think that was a major point in the tally for me in terms of this movie being anti-war, because all of these guys were being sent on effectively a suicide mission. The brass doesn't care if they live or die. There's not even really like an ultimate goal to their mission. It's like, yeah, kill as many generals as possible, but if you don't, is it materially going to affect the events of D-Day? Probably not. Just the concept of these people being used for their bodies and then knowing that they're going to be discarded at the end, like that was, I think, an important part of the like anti-war messaging of this movie.
And also to discipline Reisman in a way, I think. They kind of think Reisman is a bad officer and they want to give him a shit mission to teach him a lesson or something.
That's right, because if it doesn't work out, you get rid of him too. So he's no
Yeah,
longer the problem.
right.
Though the Dirty Dozen aren't real and this mission never occurred, there were Allied saboteurs operating behind enemy lines on the eve of the D-Day landings. There was an operation called Operation Jedburgh. It was the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, so that's like kind of the British spy infrastructure, in conjunction with the OSS, which is the predecessor to the CIA. They dropped three-man teams into France, the Netherlands, and Belgium from June to September of 1944. These three-man teams would be men who were capable of speaking French and getting in touch with the locals, and their job is to coordinate with and amplify the efforts of local resistance movements to sabotage German activity. So they would be able to get in touch with the resistance and say, what do you guys need? And then they would call in drops of ammunition or explosives or whatever the resistance needed, and they would help kind of coordinate them and get those groups together. And the novel in particular is inspired by a story that the author Nathanson heard from a combat photographer friend. He could never determine its veracity. He did like 2 years of research on this, trying to find out if the army ever gathered together a unit of convicts for behind the scenes missions, but he was never able to find anything. And the seed of truth likely comes from a real life saboteur unit from the 101st Airborne Division named the Filthy 13. And this group were indeed dropped behind enemy lines during the Normandy invasion. They suffered terrible losses, including their CO, Lieutenant Charles Mellon. They also jumped into the Netherlands during Operation Market Garden and into Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. So they were all up in there anywhere fighting was happening in Europe in 1944 and 1945. They were effectively led by Sergeant Jack McNeice. He was supposedly part Choctaw. I don't know if he actually was or if this was one of those like, yeah, my great grandma was an eighth Cherokee or whatever. But because of him, like they all cut their hair into mohawks and they painted their faces with war paint and stuff. So it was part of this kind of like team bonding thing. He didn't like following orders that didn't directly relate to the mission. So he would do what he was told if he saw the point, but otherwise no. And a lot of the other guys picked up on this attitude from him. So they weren't convicts, but they did have a reputation for kind of being shitheads, and they also had a reputation for not bathing because they would get a water ration and they would want to save it so that they could cook meat that they had poached. They were like, bathing, waste of water.
I feel like in the Netherlands they wouldn't have been very successful because the Germans were so deeply ingrained in the Dutch intelligence that every spy that was dropped, almost every single one of them was just greeted by what they called a welcome party, which is just a bunch of Nazis just showing up when they're jumping. So I wonder if that mission actually was successful or not. I'll have to look it up. And if I do find it, I'll put it on the website.
Perfect. Yeah, the Filthy 13 actually got mentioned in A Bridge Too Far as well in the book I read.
I wonder if I've heard this story on a tour before because I feel like I might have. I just cannot remember. This
Yeah,
is my brain, you guys.
they really put these guys in the shit a lot of the time. Like, I'm not kidding. When they had their first drop, like half of their guys died, almost immediately died or were captured. They kept ending up in these like jobs that nobody else wanted and accordingly getting the shit kicked out of them.
How nice.
Yeah, on the note of the use of prisoners as soldiers, I didn't find any kind of detail or historical account of the Allies using prisoners or prisoner battalions, although the Russians and the Germans both notably did. Russians basically used them as in advance of major attacks, so kind of expendable troops. And the Germans, well, there's some more specific examples.
Didn't we see a movie that had their prisoner battalion in it? Or
And there was definitely Einsatzgruppen units that were just people who they freed from prison to go, like, attack people. There's one that I'm thinking of that I can't remember its name, but it was very specifically known as a very brutal one.
I can't remember the movie. But maybe it was just, I think it was just the Germans calling out to like disciplinary battalions saying, they are treating you like shit. Come join us instead.
Reisman meets his 12 convicts and gets to show off his mad fighting skills immediately when mouthy Victor Franco, played by John Cassavetes, can't behave. And I believe John Cassavetes was nominated for Best Supporting Actor for this, but he did not win. And so Reisman then proceeds to speak to each of the men alone in their prison cells to propose the mission to him. He's basically going, look, you can come and work for me and it'll suck, but at least you won't have to serve your sentence. Or you can stay here and serve your sentence. And for some of you, that's a date with the hangman. The convicts include Joseph Vladislav, played by Charles Bronson, looking hella old, by the way. Robert Jefferson, played by former NFL player Jim Brown, which is, I'm throwing that in there because I'm sure my dad knows who Jim Brown is. He quit the NFL because of this movie. Like, he was gone for so long that the team owner was basically like, well, you can play football or you can be an actor. And Brown called his bluff and was like, well, I guess I'm going to be an actor. So yeah, also Pedro Jimenez, played by Trini Lopez, who is actually a fairly well-known singer. It's like casting like when they cast that Jonas Brother in the Midway movie, basically. And there is a brief scene where we see Lopez playing the guitar and singing a little, so we get a little bit of that. Archer Maggot, played by Telly Savalas, Vernon Pinkley, played by Canada mention Donald Sutherland, and Samson Posey, played by Clint Walker. Sergeant Clyde Boren, played by Richard Yakel, and MP, is Reisman's right-hand man.
Yeah, this cast is so star-studded because two of these people that would be Bronson and Lee Marvin. Those two are at the height of their careers at this point. Bronson actually will still go on to his star will rise, but for a lot of these people, they're new or relatively new to the screen, and this is the movie that they really get their start in. Jim Brown eventually will go on to play in a bunch of other movies, and of course, Donald Sutherland. This is actually the movie in which he credits to him getting a part in MASH, which is what really makes his career take off. So it is so star-studded. Even Telly Savalas, he'll eventually go on to be TV's Kojak, and that's where most people will remember him from, but even in this movie, he does a fantastic job.
Yeah, he's creepy.
When Donald Sutherland died, my World War II community timeline was full of pictures of him in this movie. So that's all I basically knew about this movie before that point. I was like, oh, that's that movie that he was in, apparently. He's got such a face.
On set, they had what they call the top 6 and the bottom 6, because even though there's a dozen of them, we really only get like the top 6 in any kind of screen time or any kind of role. And Donald Sutherland gets billed as the bottom 6. He's really just supposed to be a nobody. But by the end of the film, you've seen so much of this guy. He gets so much screen time that it's very clear that he's intended to do, or it looks like he was intended to do a lot more than what originally they had set out for him.
It's also I've just said it, but I'll just say it again. He's got such a face. Like, it's like you can't have him in your movie and not have him do anything. It's impossible.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, he's definitely an actor that I mean, I think obviously he's a great actor, but I also think it's nice to see him and stuff because he's just really normal looking. So you're like, "Yeah, he's just the guy."
Yeah, I have a couple of favorites from this movie, and I'll tell you them so you don't think I hate this movie. So I think Vladislav is one of my favorites, and so is Jefferson, and then maybe Bosie. Those are it for me.
What about you, Sam?
Definitely Jefferson. I think he's great. I think that because I read the book first, I'm a little like, "Ah, missed opportunities with some of these characters," you know? But yeah, definitely Jefferson. I liked movie Posey, although in the book he's Ute. Like he's indigenous and he does sun dances and he talks about like where he came from on the reservation or whatever. And then in the movie they cast a white guy who they sort of briefly allude to him being native, but they don't really get into it very much, so I was kinda like, "Aw, man."
Yeah. I really like Jim Brown in this Jefferson.
I'll read you guys a little excerpt from the book so you can get an idea of Nathanson's writing style, which is very direct, not a lot of purple prose. And I think the book suffered a little for me because I was reading From Here to Eternity by James Jones at the same time. And James Jones writes beautifully, like it's artwork. You can easily flip through a James Jones book and you will find passages that are just stunning when you read them out loud. And Nathanson's writing style isn't really like that. And I don't mean to compare it in a negative way because some people really prefer a more stripped down approach. It's just when I'm reading them that side by side, I'm like, you know. So I'll give you this little excerpt, and it's from when he gets all the convicts together. Reisman goes around and he's pouring water for everybody, kind of like the CO serving the enlisted men type thing. And it says, when he had served them all, he squatted on his haunches in their midst, sipping his coffee. Listen to me, he said softly. Believe me when I tell you this. They looked at him with suspicion again, some still smarting with the anger of his discipline, some bored because they had heard it all before. If all this means to you now is an escape from what you were facing back there at Marston Tyne, then quit now and go get yourself hung or put away in some detention barracks for 20 years or the rest of your life or whatever the hell your sentence is. You'll never make it here. They looked at him with quickened interest. But I tell you this, you've got a chance in this outfit a lot of troops would give their left nut to get. You don't know what I mean now because you don't know what's ahead of you, but you will know as soon as you start shaping up like soldiers instead of prisoners. You can go from the ass end of this man's army right up to the top with nobody out ahead of you, and I don't mean you're all going to be generals or anything like that. If he had expected laughter, he didn't get any. We've got enough generals. What we need is soldiers.
I get what you're saying about it not being like it's to the point. I do enjoy that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. It's like I said, markedly different than Jones, but not in a bad way, just in a different way.
Yeah, Lee Marvin's portrayal as Reisman is very understated, but he's so direct and to the point, but also not afraid to get his hands dirty. Like we've seen in the prison, he is knocking Franco around and he's not afraid to do it. He knows he has power over these people. And when he brings Franco to the ground, basically Bowron, the sergeant who's kind of the MP in charge of the prisoners, just turns a blind eye and just says, "Oh, all I see is the major defending himself against a convict." So he knows that he has complete power over these guys, but he sort of wants to shape them up at the same time. But the way he delivers that is a lot fewer words and more in tricking them almost into behaving like a unit.
Yeah, Reisman is really such a good example of this archetype of the hard ass officer from that era. You know, like we've seen so many movies where I'm like, yeah, he's interchangeable, man. You swap him out with anybody.
Yeah, I wish he played it maybe a little bit less straight. Like he's just straightforward in his acting. I would have liked to see that kind of conflict and we saw maybe in the first scene a little bit. I wish they'd just drawn that along into the rest of the movie.
The other thing too is that in the book, Reisman gets kind of softened because he has a girlfriend. He's seeing this woman who works at this local inn where he stays sometimes, and they're not married yet, but he's in love with her, and anytime he gets time off, he goes to see her, and there's very much this contrast between this life that he's living with the convicts inside this stockade, and then this, like, lovely glimpse of a future that he gets with her, and obviously you don't get that in the movie, so you really only get kind of one side of him. You only see what he's like when he's with these men.
And again, and that's another thing these kind of 1960s movies do. They're all so old. Like, these people probably in real life would not have been that old.
Yeah, I actually looked it up because I was curious. Both Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson were, like, well into their 40s when this movie was made, so and they look it. I mean, you can tell.
They do. I guess one fun fact about that too is that Lee Marvin and Bronson both served during World War II as well. I think Marvin was in the Marines and Bronson was in the US Army.
Yeah. Marvin was actually wounded at the Battle of Saipan in the Pacific, which we talked about in our Wind Talkers episode, if you want to learn more about that. And Charles Bronson was a tail gunner in a B-29 bomber in the Pacific, and he was also wounded in action. But it would probably be easier to list the cast members who didn't serve, honestly. Like Ernest Borgnine was in the Navy. Like a lot of these guys had Army experience during World War II.
I want to ask you guys something because you both seem to know Ernest Borgnine, and I'm like, who is this man? I don't know who this is.
He's well, first of all, in the movie, he's the one with like the funny teeth when he
Yeah,
smiles.
yeah.
Yeah, he's just such a well-known character actor. I'm trying to think of, like, what would be the role for him that, like, jumps out to me. Let me just r
It's hard to narrow it down. He was very prolific.
Yeah, he appeared in so much stuff, and because he was a character actor, it's just like yeah, he was very noticeable all the time.
I'm trying to remember if I've seen him in the other war movies that we've done, but I don't.
Well, he's be in From Here to Eternity when we watch that.
Okay,
You'll see him
fun.
again.
Fortnite will return in.
Exactly. That often happens to us when we watch an old movie. We'll watch one, and then we'll watch another, and another, and there will be the same actors in each one.
That's right.
That happens a lot. We've seen, who is it? William Holden, we've seen in, like, 5,000,000 things.
Yes.
What's his name? Let me make sure that I got his name right. William Yes, I
Yes, you
did.
did get his name right. It is William Holden. Yeah, and then we had the British actor, John Mills, was also in everything.
You're right. It's just such a generic British name. I was like, "I'm not gonna get there." John Smith?
Maybe, it'd be interesting to talk about what some of these guys are in prison for. I won't go over all of them, but, I think the one, Franco, he's in prison because he robbed someone for the equivalent of $10. So he basically went over after getting enlisted and immediately tried to break from the army and rob someone and get away. I think it's said that he actually killed someone or stabbed them to death, and so that's why he's in jail and he's sentenced to be hung. Vladislav that's Bronson. He is in jail because he shot a commanding officer in the back. However, the story he tells is that they were under harrowing gunfire and the CO tried leaving with all of the medical supplies. So he basically shot him to prevent him from leaving with the medical supplies. So he's immediately sympathetic because it's like, oh, he just shot a commanding officer because he cares about his men so much. And he naturally develops the strongest relationship with Reisman by the end of the film. And then Jefferson is in jail. According to him, he's just defending himself from a bunch of other white soldiers that tried attacking him. And I thought it was interesting because when Reisman tries to convince him to get involved in the mission, he is saying, "Oh, well, the Germans, they're the real racists here." And according to Jefferson, he's like, "That's your war. That's not mine."
Yeah, it reminded me in a way of both Masters of the Air and the film we saw recently. I guess was it Hearts War? Where just black people being accused of things that white people probably wouldn't be accused of in a way, and it's quite clear that even in the sentencing there must have been some racism going on.
I think it's interesting that the movie tried to make these men redeemable, and in the book, the crimes that they have committed are cowardly, and some of them have killed women, and some of them are in there for heinous rapes. Really, the only one whose murder maybe seems kind of justified to my recollection is the book version of Jefferson, who, by the way, has a less black sounding last name in the book. Yeah, but he's the only one who he ends up killing an officer who jumped him, I believe. But the rest of these guys, the crimes that they did are very much like, yeah, there actually wasn't a good reason. Like, sometimes people just make bad decisions and do bad things.
Speaking of a heinous crime, Maggot, of course, is in there. He kind of absorbs now that you're talking about the book, it's clear Maggot absorbs all of the worst kinda aspects of the people involved in the book. He just sort of becomes the one prisoner that's actually bad, because he is in there for killing a woman. According to his belief, God is talking directly to him and telling him to do this, and that's kinda where you get the impression that he's not just a criminal, he might also be schizophrenic.
Yeah, no, and you're right, like, they definitely amalgamate a bunch of characters into him. Like, there's a character in the book called Myron Odell who, for the entire time, this man is sure that he's innocent, that he didn't murder this woman, and he's the one who realizes at the end that he did murder her, but he's kind of the one who's, like, a bit softer, and the other guys pick on him a little bit, and he's kind of the outsider. And then there is a character named Maggot in the book. He's extremely racist. He's the one who's always on the Jefferson character's ass about one thing or another, and his crime is that he raped a sex worker, and he doesn't think that, like, it counts as rape because it was a sex worker. So, like, these guys are very much like there's not a lot that's likable about them, to be honest, and then the movie kind of tries to make their crimes a little bit more like you can be sympathetic. You can understand why in some situations what they did was warranted.
I wonder if that's because they want to give you something to root for in the movie. Because if these
Agree.
men are all so terrible, then why should we care whether they succeed on this mission or not?
That's right. For Jimenez, they don't even say what he did. In fact, Reisman just asks coyly, like, did he ever at any point claim to be innocent? It's kind of implied that he just committed some crimes to get away from the front, and that's all that we really get on that point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think, like, even though these guys are not necessarily likable in the book, they're super, super well fleshed out so that, like, you don't have to like the character to be very interested and absorbed in their arc and whether or not they're able to change or whether or not they can't. And I slightly get the sense that the filmmakers who actually bought the rights to the book before it was finished liked the premise a lot more than the actual story. And if you view the movie strictly as an adaptation, I do think it misses the point. So I think if you read the book, you're gonna have a very different experience if you started with the movie first.
Interesting. We had this conversation before, I guess, when we did our X Company episodes. Jesus, that was very far away in my brain. But our X Company episodes, we also talked about, do characters have to be redeemable, or can we be interested in them even if they're not redeemable? And for me, this movie could have gone a little harder on fleshing them out. That would have made me care about them more, I think.
Yeah. The men are driven to the middle of nowhere and made to build their own barracks. There's actually a passage in the book where they get there and they open up the building supplies that they've been sent. And one of the components of the building supplies is like they've been sent a surplus gallows that is not being used. So you can imagine these men who have been sentenced to hang and given a reprieve and they like open this box and there's clearly like a thing to build a scaffold. And, so that definitely, it hangs over their heads. And to a degree it feels pointed on Reisman's part. But then at the end, when they're about to go on their mission and they're getting to tear down the barracks and send back the supplies, he lets them burn the gallows. They pile the wood up and they set it ablaze. So that's kind of symbolic too. But yeah, so they begin training to take on their mission. Franco attempts to escape almost immediately, but he is prevented by his own criminal cohorts who fear that his escape will ruin their own chances to get a reprieve from their sentences.
There's one interesting part in that scene because before Franco tries to escape, they're listening to a radio broadcast. And the radio broadcast is it's in English, but it's basically like this demoralizing kind of broadcast about how, oh, Churchill would be a fool to invade mainland Europe. And they mention it's from this guy called Lord Haw-Haw. That kind of inspired me to look that up because I didn't know if that was real or not. And it turns out that that was a real guy. There was a radio critic from the BBC, Jonah Barrington, referred to a radio broadcast that he heard from Germany as Lord Haw-Haw, as in ha. He spoke with an English accent of the ha, damn it, get out of my way variety. And so I did some research on it. And it turns out that there's an interesting point with these radio broadcasts because Allied soldiers and civilians would actually tune in to these German propaganda broadcasts as an attempt to get some information as to the result of casualties and that kind of stuff. So if someone went on a mission like an air raid or a bombing run, they wouldn't hear back if something had gone wrong. So they would be tuning into a German propaganda broadcast to find out if something had happened to their friends. And so they had done research on, or they'd done surveys and realized that people were listening to this German propaganda, and it kind of made the British revise their policy on posting casualty reports because it was a way of maybe stemming the tide of disinformation, kind of seeing like, oh, well, we have to be more honest and upfront about this, or else people are going to tune in to the German radio broadcast.
Lord Haw-Haw was a part of the British fascist movement, and if you wanna hear us talk more about that, you can listen to our episode about Peaky Blinders: The Immortal Man.
That was a nice bridge. Didn't expect that one. It's just so really smart, these propaganda channels, because they did also just play music. So people would keep listening in between.
I think it's interesting too. I mention it because they've said in I guess the recent conflict with the United States and Iran, people in the New York Times were talking about the success of the Iranian propaganda videos, like these weird Lego AI videos, kind of mocking the United States. I think it's an interesting point because no one trusts anything that the White House says, or no one really takes seriously what is being published in American media. Distrust is so high, and I think that is seen in how much people are actually giving to propaganda efforts of a supposed enemy, right? Because they're taking it as more reliable.
And also, it's funny. Humor is such a dangerous thing, too. If people think it's funny, then they're gonna just watch it again because it's still funny. But in the meantime, you're also getting all this propaganda. The same thing with the music. If the music's good, you'll keep listening. But you also hear all the propaganda in the meantime.
Yeah, and I think that Americans are more familiar with the evils of their own government than they are with the Iranian government, so it's easy to watch those Lego videos and be like, "Oh my god, this is so funny, LOL," and then it's like, yeah, from a government that has killed, like, tens of thousands of their own people. So, yeah, for sure.
Rice Man, at some point during this whole training, provokes Posey, who's like a quiet character, into attacking him so he can teach the man hand-to-hand combat methods. Posey doesn't really want to attack him. He's like, don't provoke me, don't do it, blah blah blah. This is also apparently how he committed, is it murder that he committed? Posey? I don't remember.
Yeah.
But he says like, don't infuriate me because this is a big, big, quiet man. So he does attempt to actually stab him, but doesn't manage to because Reisman is pretty good at hand-to-hand combat. Captain Stuart Kinder, played by Ralph Meeker, who's the psychologist who's interviewing them all and trying to gain some kind of insight into their character, expresses to Reisman his fear that all of the men are essentially untamable. Reisman doesn't seem all too concerned. He's also a career shithead, after all.
I love the line from the psychologist. This exchange is, I really like it because the psychologist says, "These guys think the US Army is their enemy." And Reisman replies, "The US Army is their enemy." It kind of emblemizes that he understands that the antagonism is between the US Army and these prisoners, and his job is to change it to between them and the enemy.
Yeah, well, the US Army did, like, convict them and, like, sentence them to hang. So I guess I can't really blame them.
No, I mean, that it speaks to the like, this movie is a weirdly it's a military film that's really anti-establishment, or at least it has some anti-establishment leanings. I think it speaks to the time frame in which this movie was made, because this movie was made in the '60s, the late '60s, when America was starting to increase its involvement in the Vietnam War, and so anti-war sentiment was actually pretty high around that time, and I think that was part of the movie's success. It was a war movie that was not pro-establishment, and that way it could sort of have its cake and eat its too. It could appeal to people who wanted to see a war film without necessarily, being super pro the United States.
Yeah, and in some ways safer and maybe more effective to couch an anti-war method in, like, a safe war. Like, I if they'd made this movie about Vietnam, it might have been received differently, but they made it about World War II.
Do we think, Sam, that James Jones would have liked this movie?
I don't know, man, I'm iffy. I think he would've liked the book.
Yeah. Go listen to our episode about The Thin Red Line.
Franco manages to rally the other men into refusing to bathe or shave, earning them their nickname, the Dirty Dozen. they head to parachute training where Reisman's old nemesis, Colonel Breed, played by Robert Ryan, calls his bluff about the fact that a general is coming with them. So Breed, obviously, he's like, I'm going to get the brass band out here. I'm going to get these men in their dress uniforms looking all smart. And I'm going to make this guy look like an asshole because he probably doesn't have a general with him. So thinking quickly, Reisman, he goes around to the back of the truck where he has all his convicts, and he's like, "Yeah, there's a general here, but he's incognito, and he doesn't want anyone to know he's a general, so he's not wearing his paraphernalia or whatever." So he gets Pinkley out, and he has Pinkley pretend to be a general, and Pinkley walks up and down the lines, and he's inspecting the men or whatever. Like, "Where are you from, soldier?" And the guy says something, and he's like, "Never heard of it." And I got a kick out of this because I was reading that apparently this was supposed to be the Posey character in this scene, but the actor, Clint Walker, thought it was beneath the dignity of his character as, like, a Native American. He's like, "It's gonna make him look silly. I don't wanna do it." And so they switched it, and it ended up being Pinkley instead.
Spicy, I like it.
This scene is so funny. It still holds up in my opinion.
It really made me laugh because the brass band would start, and then the truck wasn't there, and then the brass band would go down, and then the brass band would start again, and then the truck wasn't there. I was giggling.
Sutherland does such a good job too.
Yeah, they managed to pick the least general-looking general.
I know, it's funny because I looked it up, and Donald Sutherland was, like, 30 when this movie was made, but for some reason, he looks like a child.
He does. He looks 17.
He does. He has just, like, such a, like, a narrow, like, young face.
It's also the ears, I think. He's got a little boy ears.
Yeah.
That according to Sutherland, when Clint Walker refused to take on the general role, Aldrich just pointed across the table at Sutherland and said, "You with the big ears."
Fair enough.
Vladislav is beaten by two paratroopers in a latrine on Breed's orders, who are trying to determine what the top secret mission of the Dirty Dozen actually is. He doesn't talk, but soon Colonel Breed shows up at their training area and tries to bully them into telling him what they know. But Reisman turns up in time to stop him, thankfully.
There's a subplot in the book that didn't make it into the movie where the estate that they are training on is owned by this guy who's like some kind of higher up in the British military, but he's also some kind of nobility, I think. And his daughter lives in the house and she does not want the Dirty Dozen there, but her dad is like, "It's my house. So they're going to be there if you like it or not." And throughout the whole time, she doesn't like that they're there. At one point, Reisman sets them in a mission where they have to sneak into her house at night and take a bunch of shit to prove to Reisman that they actually like went in there and got out without getting caught. And so you can see like they are kind of antagonizing her a little bit. But then you find out at this part that she's actually friends with Colonel Breed, and she's the one that called him and was like, "These convicts are on my estate, blah, blah, blah." And that's why he's showing up and like can't stop sticking his nose in. And you also find out that her boyfriend is an SS lieutenant. So she is very much like, I don't want these shitheads to kill German generals as well. And they call that from the movie, which I fully understand because it's already 2.5 hours. But I did like that the book did make an effort to include some women that had personalities and things to do.
There aren't many women in this, and the women that are in this are in questionable positions.
Definitely.
Yeah, what happens after Vladislav is confronted, Breed eventually will come to take over their entire camp and kinda line them up and interrogate them. So, the original sending the 2 thugs in, when that didn't work, he basically just took them all at gunpoint, and then what ends up happening is Raisman kind of sneaks back into his own camp and holds up all of the Airborne Division, Colonel Breed's men, and the Dirty Dozen basically disarm the Airborne Division and punch them and kick them when they're down. And we get kind of a they're coming together. They're finally starting to see a common enemy. It turns out the common enemy is Colonel Breed.
Royston, deciding that his men need a break and a reward, hires a number of sex workers to come out to the training area for a party. And I did get a kick out of the part where all the men are standing in the barracks on one side of the room, and then all the women are standing on the other side of the room, and they're all staring at each other because the men are like, they just can't believe that there's all these women there that they haven't seen in weeks and weeks and weeks. And these women are like, what have we gotten ourselves into? But they end up having a little party. And Maggot is furious, of course, because he's very religious, and he tells them all that they're going to hell. And as you can imagine, hiring a bunch of sex workers for your army guys isn't allowed. This was one part where I thought the movie did it better than the book, because in the book, Reisman hires a single sex worker and brings her out, and it's not rapey. Like, she's into it, and she's obviously getting paid. But he brings the men into the cabin where she is one at a time, and she fucks each of them in, like, a row, and it's not all of them because I think Maggot doesn't go in, and there's a couple others who are like, "I don't wanna go in." Posey doesn't wanna go in because he's married and he's loyal to his wife. But, yeah, she fucks, like, 9 or 10 dudes in a row, and I'm like, "Oh, that's a long night."
Yeah, in the movie, there's 8 of them.
They kind of turn it into this innocent little party, which is kind of sweet when they dance. Like, who knows what else happens, but at least in the movie, there's some foreplay in a sense that's innocent.
Yes. Reisman ends up in hot water. He convinces the army brass to allow his men to compete in a war games competition so that they can prove their mettle. And the ultimatum is pretty much like, if your guys aren't successful here, then like you're done.
This is where the movie, to me, becomes full summer camp because it's now they're down to it's red team versus blue team. Colonel Breed's men, I believe they're the red team, and they basically have to go in and capture the HQ and all of the command staff to prove that they're worth going on the mission. But they don't know it's life or death yet. They just know that they're on the scene to do a job. And the first kind of image we get of them on the scene is them showing up in a truck with both red and blue armbands, kind of them switching to blend in wherever they need to go and kind of showing that they're willing to sort of lie, cheat, and steal to get their way.
I enjoyed the what is he called? The guy with the green armband on, the spectator.
The Observer, he's actually a major. So he's the major who recommends the war game because they're kind of thinking of how is it like Reisman's saying, I'll put one of my guys up against 30 of Colonel Breed's guys. And they say, well, how can we prove that? And so that major who's kind of friends with Reisman suggests, well, there's a war game where Breed's soldiers are actually involved. And that's kind of where they get the idea. So that he sticks around to kind of watch them too.
Yeah, he's fun.
I enjoyed that they kind of ally with him a little bit, and they're like, when they steal an ambulance, they're like, "Are you coming?" And then they fling him off the ambulance later. After the war game, after they've kind of taken Colonel Breed captive and proved themselves, they parachute into northern France. They have a thoroughly planned mission, and I really enjoyed this part where they just recite their mission plan 3 times. It's so funny. Wherein Reisman and Vladislav infiltrate the chateau where the German generals are congregated and having a party, and the others are responsible for various other tasks, such as destroying communications, guarding escape routes, and keeping a lookout. And it's not an easy mission, but I did enjoy just Vladislav and Reisman being buddies together.
Yeah, Ladislav speaks German, notably. Reisman doesn't seem to speak a word of German, so he's standing around in this Nazi officer's uniform, and people keep trying to speak to him, and he's just like, "Ah." And I'm just like, "Would you not send in, like, one of your guys who speaks German? Would you not do that?"
It's so funny seeing them both show up in SS uniforms or like German officer uniforms. Like, oh, okay, so this was, we don't know anything as the audience, we don't know anything about their plan. All we hear is like them reciting it really at the end. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, they're going to pretend to be German officers to get into this chateau. Okay. Two people you've never seen before showing up, and one of them can't even speak German.
Yeah, like, no one has any questions about this.
What made me laugh the most is Vladislav walking up the stairs with the braceman and the German coming down and asking him about the weather. And that's the part he doesn't understand. I'm like, what? You understand everything else but not the weather?
Yeah.
Did you understand what the German officers were saying?
I did, but also, being Dutch, we get subtitles for the German speech. Unlike you.
Yes, they did not subtitle the Germans or at one point the French staff are speaking, and obviously I could understand what the staff are saying, but they didn't subtitle any of the other languages, which made me laugh. They're like, you don't need to know what the Germans are saying."
It's
It's not
really
important.
weird because my version of the movie had English subtitles for the German and then also Dutch subtitles. So I had the English subtitles on screen as part of the movie, and then just the regular subtitles that were on were also working. So I had double subtitles, but not for the entirety of the German. They kind of, I guess they picked and chose what they wanted to subtitle. Because at some point you see two guards at like the gate, I think, are speaking German, and they aren't subtitled, but other bits are. I'm like, what's going on? Why is half of it subtitled and the other half not?
Yeah.
So At the onset of their mission, though, we do find out that there is a casualty as soon as they get on the ground. That's Jimenez. They say, oh, he got caught in an apple tree and snapped his neck. And that actually comes from Trini Lopez, who's in a recording contract with a company that's owned by Frank Sinatra, and they're good friends. He tells him, Trini, you got to get out of here. You got to focus on your music career. And so he just leaves the production of the film. And so they end up having to kill him in the final scene, basically.
Yeah, he dies off screen.
This mission for Pinkley, this is Donald Sutherland's moment to shine in doing nothing, but looking so interesting while doing nothing.
Yeah, he's standing outside at the car pretending to be a driver and sort of keeping an eye on things.
Yeah, at one point, a German soldier comes over. He starts speaking to him, and of course, he doesn't understand what he's saying. So he starts getting nervous. He starts like thinking, like, "Oh, am I gonna have to kill this guy?" The German soldier eventually comes over and just takes his cigarette and lights his own with it, and just gives it back to him. So it's a little bit of fun comedy there, where he doesn't say anything, but his face says everything.
Yeah. Maggot, deciding after all that he believes these men of the Dirty Dozen deserve whatever they get because they're all sinners, kills a woman, and then opens fire on his own guys. Jefferson kills him, but now the Germans know they are here, of course. The German brass retreat to a bunker. Up on the roof, the guys have blown the communication system, so at least the Germans can't get in touch with reinforcements. So all these German brass, they go to the bunker. Reisman and co. lock them in. And they go outside to where the air vents are and they proceed to pour grenades and gasoline into the air vents. And you see all the Germans in the bunker and they're like yelling and they're trying to get out of the bunker and they can't. Then they of course light up that gasoline and there's some explosions, but it's all coming up through the air vents. They also destroy the chateau. It crumbles down quite spectacularly.
Well, in case you were feeling a little sympathetic for the civilians there, let me just say when Maggot does lose his mind, he holds a woman up at knife point and basically tells her to scream, which she does. And then there's a moment of silence or pause, and then everyone, all of the German officers just start laughing, thinking, "Oh, is it nerves or passion?"
Yeah, yeah, they're like, "Oh, the woman being sexually assaulted, that's hilarious." Anyway, back to our card game.
Yeah. So it's okay. This scene though, with the vents and the gasoline, you end up seeing Jefferson. He sort of is like they pour the gasoline, they pour the grenades, and then it's basically they steal a half track to get away, and they're all kind of waiting at the half track. And Jefferson has to be the one to kind of for four vents drop a live grenade into each of these four vents and make it to the track before the first grenade goes off. And it's kind of a spectacular scene. You see Jim Brown really give it his all. Unfortunately, he gets shot, and in my notes, I say the film treats Jefferson's death as appropriately tragic because he's the only one, as far as I can recall, that actually gets a music sting, and you sort of get a few moments on his body where you really see, oh no, he's gone. Whereas every other person, like when Pinkley gets shot or when Vladek gets shot, it's over. Like it doesn't matter. They're done. They're off the movie.
Yeah, I very much when Jefferson died, I was like, "No, not Jefferson!"
I
It's
feel
true.
like even the company itself, even the Dirty Dozen were like, no, not Jefferson.
Right?
The chateau was one of the largest set pieces ever built. It was 240 feet long and 50 feet tall, and they surrounded it with extensive landscaping for better realism. So, no green screens here. It took 250 people 4 months to build it. And then they realized that in order to blow it up, they would need 70 tons of dynamite because it was so solid. So, instead of blowing up the replica that they built, they ended up building another replica made of plastic and cork that was much easier to destroy.
Such a shame because it looked masterful and then they had to destroy stuff again. That's kind of what makes me sad about movies sometimes. There's like all of this art going into it and then it gets destroyed or disposed of.
Well, there's more chateaus where that one came from.
Fair. German reinforcements begin to arrive, even though they've tried to kind of shoot them as they are arriving. But Bosie is the one to try and hold them off. Franco also dies. It's not just Jefferson, but he dies on the truck, on their big monster truck that they're on, just German like tank-like vehicle. Just as they think they're safe, he gets shot. And ultimately, Reisman, Bowen, and Vladislav are the only ones who are able to make it to safety as the American troops advance across Normandy after D-Day. Vladislav gets his pardon in the end.
In the book, Franco decides before the mission that the first thing he's gonna do when he sees a German general is try to surrender. Like, he's just gonna be like, "They're trying to kill me, like, take me to a POW camp," kind of thing, and his death is a result of they're fleeing this area, they're leaving Posey, like, Posey is holding the Germans off so that the rest of these guys can survive, and he's absolutely kicking ass. He's like, "Fuck these Nazis." He's a huge guy, so he's just taking people out. It's great for him. Unfortunately, it does result in his death, but he gets this spectacular moment in the sun, you know? And as they're fleeing with Posey behind them, they come to this gate where there does happen to be German guards. And Franco puts a gun to Reisman's head and he's like, "Stop, stop the half track. We're going to surrender to the Germans." And I think it's Boren who shoots him and just throws him off the half track.
I had to really warm up to Baron because he was an MP, right? Before?
He's an MP in the movie. He's not an MP in the book.
Yeah, in the movie, he's actually kind of the guy assigned to them in the jail, and it's interesting because they keep him around. So he's kinda takes the place as the hangman, I guess, in the book, where he's not, I guess, not the hangman, but he's the guy from jail who was in charge of them in jail, and now he's in charge of them in the training camp, and he actually goes on the mission with them too.
Yeah, just to remind them that the jail is still out there waiting for them, I guess, until he actually finds out that they're decent soldiers and goes on a mission.
Well, in the book too, Reisman doesn't want Bowen to go on the mission, and he's like, "You're not coming." And Bowen's like, "Okay, cool." And then Bowen sneaks all of his shit onto the plane, and when they're up in the air over Normandy, Reisman is like, "Bowen, what are you doing here?" And Bowen's like, "I wanted to come."
Did
I'm
he
on
not
the plane now.
You would think he would do that account, right?
Right, there's 12 of them, it's pretty clear, right? Like, that's been in stone.
Well, maybe he's distracted. You know, they are about to go on a mission. He doesn't know if these guys are just gonna turn around and shoot him when they get on the ground, I guess.
So, there's a funny little bit, where Bronson talks about shooting that final scene because Lee Marvin has to be the guy, Reisman, he's driving the half track across the bridge in their getaway scene, and he doesn't show up on set during filming. So they end up having to look for him, and they find him in a tavern, just completely hammered. So they have to bring him to the set, and they said he basically falls out of the car they bring him into, and Bronson goes over and screams at him, "I'm gonna kill you." So other people in the cast have to keep him from punching Lee Marvin in the face to basically get him to do the final scene. But as they say, he gets in Lee Marvin as soon as you put him behind the wheels of the half track, he really kicks into high gear and delivers a great final scene.
They're just like,
Wow.
"He's hammered. Let him drive the half track. It's fine."
Okay, he's still good to drive. In my estimation of the film, it's hard to overestimate the influence that it had afterwards because one, it ended up making a huge amount of money at the box office. Apparently made enough money that Aldrich could buy his own production studio afterwards. So he ends up spending the next decade just doing whatever project he wants. And the concept of the Dirty Dozen ends up going on to inspire Enzo G. Castellari, who makes a movie called Inglorious Bastards in 1977, which of course then gets remade or spiritually remade by Tarantino. And also the theme of, or I guess the main plot element of the Dirty Dozen gets revised or revitalized in Suicide Squad. And so this kind of concept of taking a bunch of prisoners and sending them on a suicide mission ends up kind of living beyond the movie itself. There's even a Simpsons reference where in a scene where Bart has to sneak into Shelbyville, he recruits a bunch of people and ends up saying, "We need a religious guy." Todd's the religious guy who goes crazy at the end.
Yeah, definitely huge culturally, and if you're interested and you loved this movie, there are 2 sequels that came out in the '80s, and I haven't watched them. I've heard they're not good, but some of the original cast returned, and, like, you can imagine how fucking old they were by the time they made the ones that were in the '80s.
I guess I'd be interested to watch them just for the sake of them.
They might be so bad it's good, but they do look bad, that's for sure.
What are they called? The Dirty 13?
No, they have this, like, The Dirty Dozen something something, The Dirty Dozen something else something something.
I think it's like the
God.
next mission, and then one of them is called the Deadly Mission.
Yeah.
It's prime sequel bait.
Yeah, it really is. No, hang on, there's 3 sequels. We have The Dirty Dozen: The Next Mission, which came out in 1985, and Lee Marvin and Ernest Borgnine are back, looking haggard, one assumes. The next one is The Dirty Dozen: The Deadly Mission, which came out in 1987. Telly Savalas comes back, but he plays a different character. And then The Dirty Dozen, The Fatal Mission came out in 1988, and Telly Savalas once again returns as this other character.
I thought you were kidding about the names.
No, no, they're it's
Maybe one day we'll do a sequels episode where we just watch best sequels of World War II movies.
We should do that. That should be our Christmas episode.
That's the end of the movie. Before we rate this movie, I would like to remind you that you can follow us wherever you get your podcasts and rate us 5 stars, or you can send this episode to a friend.
Every time you send this episode to a friend, Ernest Borgnine gets to visit an orthodontist
I have no idea what that means.
because his teeth are so bad.
he loves it.
I didn't hear you say an orthodontist. I thought you were saying like a place. I was like, what's an orthodontist?
That's what that's what I heard too. I heard Northodontist, and I'm like, that might be a reference to something.
How many deadly missions out of 10 would you rate this movie, Mark?
Man, I don't know. I'm gonna give it a 6 deadly missions out of 10. I didn't enjoy it that much, but I did enjoy talking about it quite a bit. I don't know. Wasn't my kind of movie, maybe. How about you, Tom? You go next.
Okay, I'm gonna rate this one. I'm gonna give it 7 deadly missions out of 10 because while there's a lot of great points about how it doesn't hold up in terms of character development, sometimes you just need to go on an adventure with 12 of your buddies. You know, sometimes you just need to hang out and have a lot of hijinks and really show the top brass who's really boss. You know, I think at the end of the day, or you guys take war too seriously, and sometimes it just needs to be a blast.
I thought you were going to rate it higher than that, actually.
No, I mean, okay, so it is 2.5 hours long, and you get a lot of stuff in there that has nothing to do with what feels like they're there to do. You don't really get character development in a sense of them arriving at this like complete journey of where they're like rehabilitated or like men of honor. You don't really get a sense of them doing anything important. And they really set up at the beginning that their job is to do something that no one thinks matters. So it's fun. There's not a lot of stakes involved. It's not satisfying in a way. Although I will say, for an action movie at the end, you do get a good bit of action at the end. So you do get kind of a decent war movie. It's just, it's sort of held back by the fact that, you have a lot of names to remember. And the truth is, you're only really going to walk away knowing, 3 or 4 people. So it suffers from that, even though there is an ensemble cast.
Yeah, and in the book too, originally, Reisman doesn't know what their mission is going to be until their training is almost over. So they've been training for a couple of months, and the men are like, "What are we gonna do?" And he's like, "I don't know." So he goes and he meets with the higher ups, and they're like, "Yeah, we're just gonna drop them behind enemy lines, like in groups of 1 or 2, and we're just gonna have them sabotage stuff. And like, if they fail, it doesn't really matter, and if they die in the attempt, it doesn't really matter." And Reisman is like, "Well." You can't really motivate people to do their best if it they're so clearly disposable, and so he's the one who's like, "I need them to drop as a group because that's how I've trained them to work together, and I need to go with them." And they're like, "Well, what if you die in the attempt?" And he's like, "Well, then maybe we figure out a way that we get home after the mission. We don't just drop these guys in and then forget about them. Like, maybe we have to actually plan this out." And him going to bat for them, even though he doesn't 100% trust them maybe, I think is, a core piece of the Reisman character arc too. And I don't know that we get that much of that in the movie. And I'm also gonna rate this movie a 7 deadly missions out of 10. I think the chateau scene is really fun. Like it's a good combat sequence. It's fun to watch them infiltrate and blow things up and all that kind of stuff. But I think I would have liked it better if I had just seen it and it were not based on a book or I hadn't read the book, maybe. Because yeah, I do feel like as an adaptation, perhaps not that great. And I think maybe if it were adapted today, you'd have more opportunities to explore these guys and allow them to be more morally nuanced than they are and like really make use of the fact that they're convicts and they have done bad things and like is it possible for them to redeem themselves? So yeah, like pretty passable as a war movie and obviously a huge cultural touchstone, just maybe not a great adaptation of the book.
You know what I would have liked? I would have liked Colonel Breed at the end getting in his face the fact that they succeeded their mission.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
Definitely. He's the real enemy.
Exactly.
Alright. I'll try to find a better recommendation for you 2 next time. Something you can really bite into.
No, I feel like it's one that we just need to have seen. It's part of the war movie canon that
It's
people like.
it's definitely part of the World War II zeitgeist, I think, for sure.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for being on with us. It was really fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
If you have another recommendation, I'd love to hear it. But until then, until the next time, I would like to thank everyone for listening. You can follow us wherever you get your podcasts or rate us 5 stars. You can send this episode to a friend. You can follow us on Instagram at Rosie the Reviewer Podcast, or you can visit our website, rosieTheReviewer.com, for more info, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.